Ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to have Bilal Mumtaz here on the mic with us. He is the co-founder of Sehat.com.pk. He is the Digital Health Association General Secretary, and he is also the Lahore Chamber of Commerce and Industry e-commerce committee convener. I hope I've got all of that right.
Yeah, there's a lot more as well, but let's just keep it to this.
Yeah. I mean, वरना वो उसी में बात निकल जाएगी.
कोई बात नहीं.
This is Ismail Farouk. As you know, I have with me Dana Nasir Mirza. It's great to have you, Bilal. We've been chatting over Instagram a bit about this. Just to sort of get it right off the bat, what is Sehat.com.pk for people who don't know about it?
Sehat.com.pk is clearly a website. It's actually an e-commerce operation whereby one can visit the site or call in to order their medicines for home delivery in close to 300 locations in Pakistan.
Right. And I mean, sort of that's the image you get when you open the website. It's very clear and clean and crisp, very easy to find out which medicines you like, where they are and what you're looking for. But the main question, I think that the ingredient question that we also discussed was, this is sort of a new thing in Pakistan's pharmaceutical space, so to speak. I mean, a lot of Pakistani people generally view the buying medicines or medication in terms of going to the market, brick and mortar stores and everything. This is sort of a novel idea that's been, for many reasons, it's novel, implemented in Pakistan. Why did you move towards this style? Why not just operate out of a regular pharmacy?
So that's a very interesting question, and it's important to note that my background, or actually more specifically my family's background, has been into brick and mortar pharmacies. Being a part of the Fazaldeen group, we've been operating since 1948 in many different verticals, not just brick and mortar pharmacies, but in pharmaceutical manufacturing facilities and medical equipment agencies. So actually, the one person who I can credit to providing the impetus for starting Sehat.com.pk was my father, who himself had 45 years of experience sitting at Fazaldeen and Sons, which is a precursor to the Pharma Plus brand that had been operational since 1948. At one time, there were around 9 branches in Lahore, and now it's just cut down to this singular flagship branch on Mall Road that opened shortly after Pakistan became a nation. So there was this need for us to contribute further to the group. His true love, though he had expanded in different verticals of healthcare himself and was involved with a few projects on his own, had been with medicines. He had that knack for providing customers with amazing service, and by providing them a quality of medicine that couldn't be matched from even a competitor. So he sort of did his research, and he realized that the whole world's going to be going online very soon.
And this was when? Sorry to cut you off.
This was 2011 when the parent company of Sehat was formed. And then he realized that apart from essentially monetary constraints that are associated with creating another chain of pharmacies, which involve costs that normally are involved with running a brick and mortar organization, he saw that an online operation enabled two main things. The two main benefits were the ability to provide products from a one-stop shop, so we could invest, and we did actually, in a warehouse where we procure and store those medicines for delivery, and the ability to reach people from all corners of Pakistan, not just Lahore, or say Punjab, for example. Fazaldeen Pharma Plus, a sister concern of ours, is all over Punjab, but they haven't made a foray into another province as of yet. And with the final note, like, he himself experienced this sitting at that one shop on Mall Road, that there were customers coming from Peshawar, from Karachi, from Hyderabad, from other cities in Punjab, because they didn't have access to quality medicines in their respective areas. And he essentially wanted to continue that, you could say, legacy or that human touch through an online platform.
Right.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And I think when you first, when we first got speaking as well on Instagram, and you also mentioned this, like COVID has been a big part of, kind of the surge that you want your business to kind of experience. But was it a central motive in wanting to go digital? Well, you were saying it traces back to 2011, but did you feel like this was the perfect time, or was it always or did it really start to spring about, this whole concept of Sehat.com.pk, once you saw, how the world looked like post 2020, so to speak?
Yeah, so the motivation for anybody to go into healthcare stems from disasters or malfunctions in the system, or actually pandemics like COVID, or certain areas in which there's a lot of error being made, and a lot of basically negative hype around, say, either the tainting of the supply chain of medicines, or the hospital system, or general healthcare in Pakistan. So what actually prompted us to start this, wasn't particularly linked to certain medical disaster, but what happened in 2012 was the WHO actually issued drug safety alert number 125 on a medicine that was manufactured by Afroz Pharmaceuticals, which was a manufacturing brand over here. The drawback, or like the background behind the story actually, was that the Punjab Institute of Cardiology issued not a notice but an advertisement to procure that medicine. There was a distribution house that had tainted the supply, supplied it to the hospital, and because of that, a few patients actually ended up dying. And the WHO thought it actually fit not to punish either the hospital or the distributor, but the manufacturer. So we saw this as sort of an impetus to, not exactly continue what we had planned, but to make it a point that we would do our level best to procure directly from the manufacturer or an authorized distributor, as opposed to just procuring directly from pharmacies or other sort of institutions where we saw it convenient to procure.
Right. And I think you bring up a good point, because one of my friends recently started a pharmacy. And one of the things that he saw while conducting a market analysis is that when you go towards the Old Lahore side, where there's a lot of distributors and everyone there, the condition or the sort of mechanisms of those institutions are very flawed in terms of people. The consumers want a sort of discount that these guys are giving them, and they don't care whether the medicines have been backdated, whether they're expired, or whatever is going on. So have you made sort of a conscious effort to let people raise awareness about how you're circumventing these potential issues that are pretty commonplace and people don't even know about them, in terms of the medicines that they think are sort of going to make them better, but they could have an added risk because of the institutions involved?
I think the public needs to know about certain issues. At the same time, it doesn't seem quite ethical to badmouth, say, the practices going on in Lohari market in Lahore. And I understand what you mean. In fact, to further build upon that, there are 3 categories of tainted medicines. They're either fake, which means the packaging is formulated and even the medicine is formulated and it represents another brand misleadingly. Either they're adulterated, which means that usme milavat hui hai, there's some mixing of some ingredient over there, or they're spurious, which, like you said, means they're backdated incorrectly, or they're shown that they're actually efficacious and potent whereby in reality they've actually been expired. So again, our efforts lie in not trying to spread this message on our own, but in collaborating with different pharmaceutical partners all over Pakistan to help them make sure that their medicines are sold through a trusted and reliable source to the right customer at the right time. In fact, if I had to give you another example, there's a particular pneumonia vaccine that's manufactured by one of the biggest brands in the world. They're multinational operating in Pakistan. And they have entrusted that vaccine with us, and we are only one of 2 other institutions for which that vaccine has been given, because they've done their research too. They even know that a regular pharmacy, for example, doesn't go to the effort of actually employing a cold chain fridge. They might have consumer fridge, and the pack of the medicine, and people are now more aware of vaccine storage conditions because of COVID and the vaccines coming out, is 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. Not just about procuring the incorrect equipment for storing that particular medicine. There's also a huge question mark about these pharmacies and how they can make sure that even in the summer months that regular medicines are maintained properly and they don't lose their efficacy.
Right. I'm just curious, I understand the tangent that you've set up sehat.com.pk on, but I'm curious, as your experience as a businessman in the last however long you've been directly involved on the ground trying to make this work, it's a very simple point blank question. Is there an ease to doing business in Pakistan, do you think, from your perspective? Is there?
It's a very broad-ended question. So, like in terms of ease of doing business, I would say that essentially, if you did compare ourselves with, say, other markets in South Asia, I think we do still employ very cheap labor. In terms of ease of managing a business, there is a bit of a learning curve for people who work professionally around here, especially, as somebody who's definitely part and parcel and owner of Sehat. I have 4 elder brothers and we're all involved.
Yeah.
Even though my duties and responsibilities regarded just business development and marketing, I had to get involved in other departments in the company to make sure things are running smoothly, as did all of us, actually. And essentially, when it comes to doing business as a whole, I think things are definitely getting better right now. What the digital age is providing us is more transparency and more access for business opportunities. And that's evident by how we just got our seller center by Amazon approved a few days ago. I know people who've been actually on Amazon over the past 4 or 5 years, but just that simple announcement and that those talks with the Ministry of Commerce with Amazon show that, things are probably only going to get better from here on in.
Right.
And we are making those efforts, right? I know Ijad Labs has enabled Pakistanis to open a PayPal account, and certain other payment methods over here exist for the freelancer market.
Yeah.
And, ease of business, right? It's sort of like maybe conventional business might be out of the window, but I think there's a lot in the pipeline for startups and freelancers and IT professionals in Pakistan.
Right. And so the problem with commercial, like you said, conventional businesses in Pakistan is certain aspects of bureaucratic overreach and sort of bad regulation has caused a lot of hiccups and a lot of barriers for people to enter into different markets. I mean, there are a lot of examples. Do you think there's a risk? I mean, touch wood, but is there a risk of that sort of happening as the e-commerce or digital space grows as well, that you might see that sort of thing where you have eventually end up having a lot of big players who were already there and difficult for smaller players to enter?
So it's a very intricate question that you've asked. And ultimately, what I can say is that Pakistan has a very unique stance on e-commerce and startups. I think those two words are oftentimes interchangeable because a bulk majority of startups, as you see, do have a very strong online presence. In fact, without that online presence, they would have no justification for doing business. And right, most e-commerce sites do delve themselves as startups because how do they start? They start with a bunch of people operating out of a room, or people who want to put funds into a project and have them bootstrap that project till they essentially get funding in. And I think that's where a lot of good organizations, like say, specifically for healthcare, that's where the Digital Health Association comes in place, where it needs to figure out, right, whether it needs to correspond directly with the Ministry of Health, Drug Regulatory Authority of Pakistan. Right now, an interesting development happened that the PMDC became the PMC. So it's not really the organization that handles dental affairs. It's just for medical affairs and making sure that, right, quackery can essentially be stopped in all its forms. The Pakistan E-Commerce Consortium, which is another company or actually enterprise like organization or support group that I'm a part of, also plans to make it very clear that, support should be given in terms of trainings, in terms of collaborations with other big stakeholders in e-commerce. And that's essentially what the Lahore Chamber is. It's basically an avenue for committees to submit policy changes that can be made at the provincial level, to be vetted by the president of the chamber, to be forwarded on to the right authorities to come into place. Barriers to entry, right, they naturally do exist in healthcare over here. And having looked at our legislation, I think legislation, for the most part, over here is written very well. It's just that implementation becomes a very big issue. Apparently, what happened was, because my sister concerns lie in the medical equipment field, the Drug Regulatory Authority of Pakistan wants to act like the FDA in approving those agencies. But having talked to a few people about how affairs are at the governmental level, I've been told that there's only 3 people assigned for this project to convince everyone that's selling medical equipment to get a drug license and to regulate that change. Yes, 3 people.
So I think you've hit the nail on its head, because I think often the problem with regulation, it sounds great and it has great intentions and it's going to do great things. But when it comes to implementation, when you have actually, you see what's happening on the ground, either it's very ineffective or it has the opposite effect of what you want it to have. You also touched on startup and e-commerce in Pakistan. That's a very interesting topic, and I think you're very well versed in that sort of domain. Can you talk us through how e-commerce has developed in Pakistan and its growth in these recent years, and why it sort of lagged behind e-commerce in a lot of other countries over the world?
So the State Bank of Pakistan actually has verified data on the number of verified, you could say, e-commerce vendors that exist in Pakistan. It's grown, I'd say, quite tremendously over the past 5 years. In 2016, there might have been 600. Now there are 1,700. And I do believe that our revenue, our GMV, is somewhere around the tens of billions of rupees. Where it sort of became a unique case for Pakistan was that e-commerce essentially took off with the advent of the mobile internet revolution. So I don't know if I mentioned this before, but when we launched Sehat in April 2014, I believe in July or August, was when every single person started to get 4G and 3G on their phones. And that's essentially where we got a huge boost in our business, because we got a huge mobile audience. Even now, most of our traffic is done through mobile sessions, not desktop sessions. So essentially over here, that's one essentially main point to keep in mind, that it's a mobile heavy market. The second thing to keep in mind is that we are still very much reliant on brick and mortar, and the eGMV percentage that we've calculated is around 0.5 to 0.6%, which means 1 out of every 200 orders is done at the online level. And brick and mortar still dominates, but as time goes by, especially where people are going to be more cognizant of going online and pushing that sort of retail front, is during a pandemic such as COVID, where we naturally have seen that a lot of even traditional business have not exactly pivoted, but have created a separate parallel online component of their business. So it's definitely something that I see being on the ascendancy. And with the right support, with the right partners, with people who are blessed to be in the same position as I am to help out, we can essentially become a very good IT-based market, and we can have local talent over here use e-commerce to their advantage, not just through seller centers like Amazon, but maybe creating a native platform that can compete on the global scale.
Yeah,
I think we've got it.
Yeah.
I think we've got that local platform. And Ismail asked some very intricate questions, as you can tell, very like cutting edge questions.
Okay.
I'm more of a layman. I would really want to ask you about things that, when I knew you were coming in, I immediately wanted to ask you, which was about homeopathic medication. I think Pakistan is one of those economies, is one of those countries, one of those our societies are those which do believe in herbal medication, homeopathic medication. I can't even tell you the difference between those two things, right? But we do, to a very large extent, think that those are all alternative, legitimate forms of medication to the conventional mainstream. Some would say Western medication. There's a lot to unpack in this subject. Obviously, the nuances surrounding why people might have a mistrust towards Western medication as opposed to, and vice versa, and also the efficacy and the legitimacy of homeopathic medication in comparison to. I know that I should maybe be asking
it's
this.
It's a very, very good question.
Yeah, but what do you and can I find my daily homeopathic needs fulfilled on Sehat? And if not, why not? Like, I really want to know.
Well, you can. What happened in 2015 was a legislation was passed by DRAP to regulate not just homeopathic and herbal, but Unani and Ayurvedic medicines. I don't know if you can distinguish between
not at all.
But Unani is like a Hakim Khan over here. Right. That's not herbal or homeopathic. Right. Homeopathy requires a degree. Someone to practice it requires a degree in that particular subject. And essentially what that implies is that a single molecule, say, as opposed to an efficacious tablet, can have the same effect on your body. And the selling point behind homeopathy is virtually there's no side effects behind it. Yeah. It's like you get the feeling after you go visit a homeopath that you're given a placebo. Because what does he do? He takes a solution and he just puts like a drop or 2 drops on like a small tube of maybe like 100 mini tablets. And then he'll tell you.
Tastes great.
Sugary. Yes. Like my breakfast cereal.
I'd rather have that over Panadol.
Frosties, they're great.
But yeah, you were saying.
Man. So essentially, you can get homeopathic medicines on Sehat because they have been regulated by the proper authorities. it is the responsibility of the people making those homeopathic medicines to register themselves with their channel, and we're essentially the retail arm of anybody who wants to sell. And I think the main question that you wanted to ask was, why is there a lot of mistrust among Western medicine brands or solutions? I'd say that it has to do with the fact that there's a level of trust between, say, the layman over here, who might not come from Lahore but who might come from the outskirts, and the Hakim Khana, because he employs a practice that's been going on for hundreds of years. They've got particular formulas that they know work, especially, say, for example, someone wants to take Shilajit, for example, for knee pain. There's definitely proven results behind it. And there's also, I think, that level of human interaction between the Hakim and the patient. So, and it's a part of our culture, essentially, for certain things, especially when it comes to an enhancement or fatigue or certain, ailments, to resort to taking, Unani or herbal or homeopathic or even multivitamins as opposed to traditional medicines.
Right.
And when you come to think about it, right, the Facebook market for multivitamins in Pakistan is quite big, actually. And it's dominated by, you could say, non-pharmaceutical brands. So it's actually dominated by brands that are just making multivitamins. Because, that actually, from a professional, or you could say the actual, nomenclature in question, gets termed as nutraceuticals. Creating multivitamins. And pharma plants have to create a separate nutraceutical division and another plant to get into nutraceuticals.
Okay.
And so that's also something that's quite encouraging, right? That there's a huge nutraceutical market out there on social media that's being sold, and even these people employ their own websites, and pharma is only just a portion of it. The majority is dominated by people who are just doing that and either importing like the drugs from abroad and packaging them, or importing the raw material and then finalizing it, or making it from scratch over here.
I saw, like, I don't know if this exactly counts as what you're talking about, but we all know who Wasim Badami is.
Yes.
Wasim Badami.
Yes.
Yeah, what a guy. What a character.
Have you seen the page Wasim Badami in Unusual Places?
Yeah, I love that. I love
He's
that
everywhere.
page. So they just like crop him into, Photoshop him into like the most
all
random
sorts of
things. He's like winning the World Cup as Messi, or sorry, Messi's never won the World Cup. My bad. Oh, zing. He's a big
never
Messi
even
fan.
won the Copa America,
Yeah.
so it's okay.
He's the biggest Messi fan right here.
All right.
Screw you. Anyway, Wasim Badami started his own, I don't know, was it a herbal medication brand or something? Like, I work back at his mall, so I was just like going to the mall one day, and I just saw this advertisement, and it's like it advertised itself as, like herbal medication, homeopathy, as you said, all of that. And I just saw Wasim Badami's face, and I'm like, what does he do, related to this? Or, a lot of people do tend to associate themselves with these kind of brands because they know they'll sell, because they know there's a market for it, because they know, like, even the Western alternatives do. Like, a lot of people tell me that Body Shop has a lot of the things that you can find at Wasim Badami's shop. Which makes me think, like, that's a good local substitute.
And that's a good way to cross-sell, I guess. Yeah, so, if I even talk about the research I did in the beginning, so I had a look at all of our pharmaceutical manufacturers, and I was just comparing their website traffic to ours. Now, naturally, we should be beating all of them in traffic. And there was one supplier of ours that actually beat us in the amount of hits or sessions they got on a daily basis. And it was this Dawa Khan out of Karachi.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Whoa.
So they were selling us
Online.
they were selling us their products, and they also had their own e-commerce site.
Wow.
It was doing very, very well.
Wow. Oh no, there we go. Umer Fasie. Yeah, this has been happening for a while, ladies and gentlemen. If we've got away from you,
I think your mic's
it is
bored,
due to-
man. He's just I've had enough of this.
No, I think Umer Fasie is getting a great arm workout in today. We always have a technical difficulty on the podcast. It's not a podcast
That's
without
just
one.
how we roll.
This time, Umer has been holding the tripod for Bilal. It's nice. But don't worry. It's a very from home setup. This happens all the time.
Oh, it's very, very comforting. I'm happy here. It's like,
I'm glad you like
this
it.
is like my college dorm, actually, if I were to be very frank.
This is the vibe. I finally understand.
College dorm vibe.
We are the college dorm. Thank you,
That's,
Bilal.
we're
trying to-
25 now. I think we should sort of move away from that.
Yeah, I mean,
Time to,
it's
sort
up
of-
to you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
move on from college, man.
Yeah, so I mean, you mentioned that obviously you have certain, so homeopathic medicines have been regulated, and people who want to sell them can do so on Sehat. So that just makes me want to ask, what exactly is the business model? So is it sort of like you selling your own medicines, or is it like an Amazon for medicines where other people can come on the platform and use it to sell their medicines?
So it's neither. Basically, it's the fact that we don't really operate on a marketplace model. We encourage other suppliers to list their medicines or products on our website, but we make sure that their sales tax registered, and if they're selling medicines, that they've got drug licenses, and that their products also have been registered with the relevant authorities. And our model is simply the fact that we stock beforehand, or we try our best to. And then we have basically an ERP that we've developed that shows or like is reflective of like the e-commerce ordering process, where somebody orders and then we know in the system that, it gets barcoded and scanned, when it's put in the warehouse, when it goes through processing, even when it gets packaged, it's scanned again and it's dispatched to our external courier partners. So essentially our model is that of like a stockist, you could say, that then basically is collaborative with all these different stakeholders in the e-commerce ordering process, like the payment partners and the logistic partners, and then we deliver straight to the customer through the e-commerce site or the call center.
Right. And how many locations have you sort of expanded into? Because obviously you mentioned at the start of the podcast that one of the main problems is that rural areas or access. Unfortunately, there are places in Pakistan where you don't even have proper access to internet, but obviously you can't do much there right now. But how much of an impact has your far-reaching delivery network had?
All right. So basically, the courier partners do a good job in this regard because they deliver not only to other cities, but gaos and chucks. So we cover around 300 different locations within Pakistan. And if I were to actually have you play a guessing game, how many cities do you think we've delivered to in our lifetime?
I really want to play this game though. Like I love guessing games.
If it's 300 locations, that must mean that the cities are less than 300.
Obviously. Give us any hints, or are we just gonna?
Okay. Just go for it. I mean.
Okay.
250.
No, don't guess so high so that we can actually guess lower. 185.
50.
185.
50, 185.
Went low.
Your previous guess was actually much closer. It's 267.
Whoa.
See?
267 or 300.
Yeah. And we deliver to around 110 every month. So that is where we got our validation that yes, there is a demand for the products that we supply, and there are people out there in Pakistan who are capable of ordering medicines, and we're capable of interacting with an e-commerce site.
And one important thing I think, especially in the space that you're operating in, is to sort of convert. I don't know if that's the right word, but change the mindset of people so that they recognize that medicines can be like bought from that sort of online space, and this is a proper avenue. So I think one way to judge that, maybe I might be wrong, is how many returning customers do you have? And what's the churn rate? So how's that been like? Do you see a lot of returning customers?
Yeah, around 40%.
That's great.
Returning, actually. Yeah.
And do you like in this quest to kind of bridge the gap of access to medication and places where normally people can't get this kind of medication, what were some of the biggest hurdles that you faced, you think, not just in terms of like the logistics, of course that's important too, of just getting it there, but apart from that, like stuff like, I'm sure since you said you're a BDM marketing guy, business development marketing is BDM, right?
I don't know. Maybe he's the right guy to ask.
Yeah, I'm supposed to be
it's BD basically. Business development.
And then the M is marketing, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, just want to clarify. Okay, BDM. So was there a challenge when it came to marketing or convincing people, so to speak, that this is and if there was, what was specifically that challenge and how did you tackle it?
So when we started off, we essentially created a system that was modeled off an Oracle ERP. It was a white labeled software that we created, and we had only set it up for prepayments. We didn't figure out how to implement cash on delivery in that software because the way we set up the project was so intricate that, there's certain divisions and certain processes behind the ordering process. Like once a medicine gets ordered, everything has to be checked. So the way we did that was I had to actually sit with my team for 2 weeks to create that voucher in the system to allow for COD to happen. And then what we later found out is that in Lahore, people weren't willing to wait a day because we were used to doing overnight deliveries. So then we had to essentially find a local partner to do same day deliveries to the end consumer. And that obviously naturally increased our sales. And then essentially when we were trying to partner with different institutions or companies, or even when it came to patients who saw, online that there were other competitors in the market that were offering them huge and hefty discounts that we weren't able to offer, we simply would play not exactly a game with them, but use our strength of authenticity and being a reputed name in pharmaceuticals for so long to say that we can actually guarantee you that our medicines are authentic. We can show you that we stock them, for one, and we have that guarantee and that agreement with the manufacturer that's coming from a very reliable source. And, there's even customers right now who might have ordered for the 5th or 6th time that might ask for, say, extra discount. And we haven't given them yet, but they still keep ordering. So that means that they're finding something reliable about the system.
Yeah.
The trust is still intact.
You talked about COD. That sort of got me thinking about one of the biggest problems, one of the biggest hurdles that has been in place in Pakistan for a long time, has been the banking system and the credit and debit card sort of take-up rate. You see a lot of online payment systems operating everywhere in the US and the West, where people don't even carry that much cash around anymore. It's all through their cards. We don't see a lot of that here. There's a lot of hurdles that go into sort of people being allowed to make credit or debit cards, sort of weird rules and regulations that sort of, especially against women, that they have to show like 3 male witnesses or something of the sort, in a lot of banks, which make no sense. So how do you think that hurdle can be solved? Do you see sort of in the next 4 or 5 years, Pakistani taking a more of an online payment space? Because that is obviously going to be a direct boost to businesses like yourselves and the e-commerce space in Pakistan.
So we're seeing initiatives happen in that regard. There's a huge group that is behind Pepsi in Pakistan called the Akhtar Few group, which is a collaboration between them and a Chinese company, and they're developing a digital wallet. Sada Pay is also developing like a card that has 0 transaction fees. Every single bank out there, regardless of how unknown they were, has now implemented internet banking because of the COVID pandemic, because they realize it's very hard for people to even go into bank branches. And we're seeing an even bigger rise in Easy Paisa and Jazz Cash usage, because they're also planning to create their own shops that are, beautifully linked with their wallets. So essentially, I do, see that happening even now, even with Sehat, right? Since day one, COD has not been, the most dominant payment method of ours. Like, it's still less than 50%.
Really?
Yes.
What is the most dominant?
It is still the most dominant, but not by staggering majority.
Okay, yeah.
It's then like, credit card and Easy Pass, and there's like around 8 or 9 payment methods that we have.
Yeah, okay. So it is changing in the right direction for e-commerce businesses and everything to flourish.
Yeah, definitely. Even if I look at the SPP data, I guess the reliance has become much less on COD now. So now it's at around 70%, whereas 5 years ago it was 90 plus.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons for that, sorry to cut you off, is that people have started to gain more trust in e-commerce as a whole. Whereby first they were like, if we pay first and हमारे साथ कोई धोखा हो जाए या कोई fraud हो जाए तो क्या होगा? Yeah, a lot of people even right now, it's kind of a joke, but they're like, don't pay online on Food Panda, वो फिर आपको order नहीं देते, cancel हो जाता है.
होता भी है.
Yeah, I mean some stuff like that.
करीम के साथ भी है कि riders refuse करते हैं आपके ride को अगर आपने credit card के साथ pay किया.
Umer Fasie got charged 1,900 rupees last night to go 15 minutes from here by a rider that was 33 minutes away. Thankfully, he got his transaction back immediately. But if that happens to somebody else, I'm never using Kareem again. If they charged me 1,900 for a ride I didn't take.
So, Lahore Chamber of Commerce and Industry, you're obviously the e-commerce committee convener. What exactly? So you sort of alluded to what the LCCI does. What exactly is your role there, and how have you been, working in this space in that regard?
So this is the first year that they've actually created a committee, and if I were to be very blunt, there really hasn't been any work done so far because of the pandemic. It's hard for people to come to the chamber, for one, and in general, the basically standing committees have been assigned haven't had an incentive to be active. Right now, what happened around a week ago is a notice was actually given by the president that the standing committee should be active, and there are certain time slots that they can use to use the facility at the LCCI to hold these meetings. So it's something that I'm looking forward to a lot. I'm still in the stages of formulating the committee. And I know that there are certain, elements such as digital government, such as payment methods, such as logistics, such as tech infrastructure, such as supply chain and e-tail. There's essentially 9 pillars of e-commerce that essentially were conveyed to me by Badr Khushnood, who, as you know, is someone who's been involved quite a bit with Pasha, Pakistan Software Housing Association, and someone who runs a very big digital marketing and tech agency called Bramers over here. So he's someone who's helped me out quite a bit in learning about this initiative. And that goes without saying that, if you want to do something big, you obviously have to learn from the masters.
Yeah, of
so
course.
Still in that stage, and hopefully within, I'd say, a couple of weeks to 3 weeks, I'll actually start getting the ball rolling over there.
And what do you hope to sort of do in the next sort of the first few phases of the committee starting? Because obviously it's pretty new in terms of its formation.
So I'd like to sort of have certain policies passed whereby taxation can be laxed on startups. Right now, there still is a heavy revenue tax that needs to be paid, even if a startup.
And sorry to cut you off. There was this post I saw on Twitter where there was some sort of talk going on about taxing people who freelancers, basically, who sort of get their money from outside companies, and there was a lot of uproar about how we shouldn't really disincentivize or make it harder for them, and rather we want these people to sort of engage more in these sort of activities. So I think you're talking about the same sort of principle.
So from principle, so right now, startups have to pay a revenue tax, which is something they will pay if they're making a loss. Normally, startups were given a tax holiday. IT firms had to pay an internet tax of 19%. So policies, that have to be passed now include basically the way startups are taxed, the way essentially freelancers who are using e-commerce have to declare withholding tax for transactions. It has to do with the fact that logistic companies have to be put on board. Like if there's a pandemic and they shut down, then that means a lot, maybe 80 or 90% of e-commerce companies are going to suffer greatly as a result. I think especially in terms of, on that note, when it comes to reconciliation between logistics companies, e-commerce sites, there has to be some sort of escrow in place. There's no delay in them giving money back to the vendor if COD is involved. So these are just some of the ideas off the top of my head. There's a lot more that I'm willing to learn from other people, and I want to essentially be that voice for them.
That's great. That's absolutely great. I think this is sort of towards the end of the podcast. What we do is we have sort of a short window where we leave it to you.
The last segment.
He's very particular about this. The last segment of the podcast where we sort of give you your sort of space and time to do whatever you want, say whatever you want. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So I'm really, really happy that both of you called me here on a Saturday.
Our pleasure.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
know it's a Sabbath for a lot of people, but it's...
Hey, this is the only time we get as like people who have work and stuff. Saturday is like the best day to. But we love to have you here. I just want to say this is an absolute pleasure. You're very soothing on the ears. I'm sorry, this is supposed to be his last segment. Please go on.
but like as somebody who's essentially been here in the startup ecosystem for the past 7 years, I think it's very important to keep in mind that we're now entering a very unique phase where you have mentors who have actually worked on startups for a very significant amount of time. Before, not to point fingers at anyone, that wasn't really the case. There was a huge element of rigidness when it came to incubation centers and acceleration centers, and even in general mentorship that was being offered to startups at the time. And I just want the entire startup community of Pakistan to remember that sometimes acknowledging your weakness can be your biggest strength, and sometimes your weaknesses also can be manifested into strengths by you realizing that success isn't something that you should even do on your own. You will always need support, whether it's advice, whether it's a friend motivating you, whether it's somebody you think you can collaborate with because you guys have good synergies and good skill sets. Having that said, right, I had a choice to just be involved in e-commerce, running an online pharmacy. And I had that choice to stay on abroad when I graduated, but I wanted to come back. I wanted to make an impact for Pakistan and my people. And I wanted to make sure that we can finally become the great nation that our founder Qadi Azam wanted us to be. And we can finally do that given that we have the talent, we have the numbers for internet usage. We just need to improve our digital literacy, and we need everybody to support our vision of becoming a more digitally connected and more fruitful Pakistan. So that's basically my 2
Amen
cents
to
about
that.
this whole session.
And honestly, that's brilliant. We need more people like you. It goes without saying, we need more people like you in this country. And I'm really, really glad you're doing what you're doing. For those of you who are watching, who are curious how you can experience everything that we have been talking about, go to if I butchered this, I'm sorry, www.sehat, that's SEHAT, boom.com.pk. Get all your I know for sure I'm gonna get my next batch of medicine from sehat.com.pk, and I have a lot of medication that I need to take, so go check it out for yourself as well. Give Bilal a follow. All of those links are in the description below at the video. Leave a nice comment, and please tell us, and Ismail, take it away, please.
Yeah, I mean, you've said everything that I could have said, but yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. And obviously, we'll definitely be checking out Sehat for our medication needs, and everyone else, you better do the same. This has been On the Mic with Bilal Mumtaz. Until next time, take it easy.
And keep it tight.